Good morning, Microsoft Ignite. How's everybody doing? Are you having a good show? Yes. It's been an amazing couple of days. We're on day 3. It's been very exciting. I am so appreciative. Everybody's been coming around the communities area, having chats with us in terms of sharing the struggles or opportunities that you're addressing with technology. How many people are here excited to learn about governance now? Governance? How many people are old school administrators? So we're talking back in the NT40 days, who remembers? A lot of people, right? I started my career on Server 2003, so I'm a little bit younger. But you know what it is? It's crazy in the way that now we have cloud technology enabling at our fingertips the ability to spin up all these resources. And a lot of organizations look at this as, this is promising because I can spin up applications on the fly. I can go and do what I need to do, and my organization can be enabled. But as an IT professional, we look at that and go, ooh, how do we control this? How do we ensure that compliance is put into play? And how do we ensure that we have the rules set in place that we have to abide by for certain standards or certain ISOs, right? Cloud is great. Cloud enablement is fantastic because it's at your fingertips, create the resources and go. But how do you keep it within the guardrails? How do you ensure that the whole aspect of what my organization needs to accomplish is done in such a way that meets the certifications or requirements that we have to abide by as our organization? And this is where governance comes into play, and governance is throughout Azure. And the actual aspect of governance is growing in terms of its capabilities and its extension across services that are even non-traditional. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So let's get into it. Tailwind Traders, you've been hearing about Tailwind Traders all week. It's our new company that's out there, and they have governance challenges like most of you do right now, right? The situation they have currently, controlling which VMs people have access to. How many people remember having that one centralized password for everybody to have access to in an administration group? Hands are going up, and they have carte blanche access to everything. How do you govern against that in a cloud-based world? Here we go, click. There we go. Apparently I got to stand back here. So the ability to limit which VMs people can deploy, right? Again, we don't want to have carte blanche access. I remember when we used to first showcase how easy it was to spin up VMs, we would do this dare, should I spin up the $5,000 an hour VM and see what my manager says, right? Imagine if that happens at your organization, right? Now this cost center is blowing out of whack, and somebody has to pay that bill. So how do you control against that? Oop, did it too fast this time. So ensure that the resources are identified. In a cloud-based world, you now have this scenario where when these resources are being spun up, what cost center do they align to? Who owns what subscription? Who owns what resource? And is the resource meant to be production, or is it meant to be development? And if it's development, how, if their resources are not tagged, how do I know which resources to remove when the development is completed? I also need to manage access. So can I allow carte blanche access to all subscriptions? Can I allow carte blanche access to all resources? No. I have to scale it back, and I have to govern it down to this department has access to this department has access to that. And even from an administrative standpoint, again, having that power admin account has to be controlled. We're in a day and age where we have digital espionage and people trying to gain access to your data and try to steal your data. So you want to provide that at least access of control to all your resources for the organization that you support. This is what governance can bring to the table. And last but not least, you want to ensure that when new subscriptions are spun up, I'm seeing this on the daily now, where a new application is being created, it's being created as a new subscription, and then you have to manually go in and enforce all the policies and rules for what that subscription abides to. There's a really cool offering called Blueprint, which we're going to touch on today. And this is a fundamental session, so this is not meant to be going deep in the weeds. But the fundamental piece of Blueprint is such that I can simply and quickly create this instance, this capability for this developer to build out their application and keep within the guardrails, but not restrict them from, oh, okay, now I have to talk to IT to get this all done. And we're going to explore into that today. So, Tailwind Traders. They've adopted the cloud, they have a hybrid implementation on the go, and they're having challenges because costs are out of whack, people are spinning up solutions on the fly, we have, compliance is a huge concern. There's just too much availability to access of resources right now. So what they're looking at is how do we take governance and allow for that control that we need as IT professionals to ensure that we stay compliant, but still provide that flexibility to the developer side of the organization to build out the resources seamlessly, but stay within the certification requirements or ISO requirements for that organization. So let's look at our first example. Tailwind Traders wants to restrict which users have access to what VMs through Azure Portal. When you're spinning up your subscription for the first time, and if you haven't set up the role-based access control out of the gate, you have a scenario where, hey, you know what? I have access to all the VMs carte blanche. And that can be troublesome, right? Because somebody may mistakenly delete a VM or maybe reboot a VM, and they shouldn't be rebooting a VM, right? So what we're going to look at first is we're going to go through the demo how we actually can apply role-based access control to grant users access to specific resources and only the resources that we assign. Now, all the demonstrations today have been recorded, and we did this purposely because there are some instances that when you're setting a policy, it could take anywhere from 30 minutes to a couple hours for this to be implemented, and we wanted to make sure that for all the demonstrations we showed you from A to B, the entire implementation of each solution. And then you'll have access to this later on Tech Community as well. So let's get started. So we're into Azure Portal, and I have my virtual machines, A and B, made available to the main administrator. And we need to assign access to these VMs to our junior admins. So we'll go in and we'll, as a junior admin right now, and we're going to go into the virtual machines, and you'll see that there are no virtual machines for me to manage. They haven't been assigned to me yet. So we're going to go in, and we're going to also go into the secondary set of junior admins because this company has, so Tailwind Traders has the branches off of their offices, and we're going to go into their virtual machine management console, and again, they don't have access to manage those VMs as well. Now, this was done at the initial creation of those VMs that only the senior admin would have access to govern over these VMs, this allowing the access from the junior admins to access those VMs. So now we're going to add it as a role assignment. So in here, we're going to add to the management group the assignment to allow for the management of only the VMA, not VMB. So we're going to go in here, we're going to select the role. And these roles are, there's a ton of roles that are available that allow you to scan through. There are ways to customize the role. However, we at Microsoft do recommend to go with the ones that are standard first before creating your own. So we're going to go in and we're going to select the admin group. So here's our junior admin group A. And we're going to save it. So now the role assignment has been added. And we're going to go back to the resource groups because we're also going to add them to the resource group. So we'll add the access control to the resource group. Role assignment. And the role that we're adding on is contributor. So in a contributor is a limited set of functionality for admin. It doesn't give you carte blanche admin access to the VMs. So there we go. And again, we'll add the junior admins to this. And we'll save it. And it's adding the role assignment, and we're good to go. So we go back into the junior admin console, and we'll log in as a junior admin. And we'll go back to our virtual machines. And as you can see, I now, as a junior admin, have access to manage this. Now, you can get granular. You can get granular. We have it as a contributor, which gives it limited functionality in terms of management of said VM. But you can get granular in terms of what that junior admin can now have the ability to do. Reboot, restart, delete, on and on, right? This is important because disaster strikes when carte blanche access occurs and you have that shared password amongst everybody. Even better still, the ability to audit what changes people are doing to create these changes, right? When there's something that happens and there's a catastrophe that occurs and a VM gets deleted by mistake, implying governance rules has the ability to then go through the breadcrumbs and understand what changes were made, what situation occurred, how do we address this, why did that individual have that access and who granted them that access, right? This is the beauty of what governance can provide, not only from a perspective of restricting users or providing the pathways that these administrators or users have to abide by. It's also the fact that I can actually audit to see what's going on and who's assigned what permissions as well. So let's dive into role-based access control. As mentioned, you have the ability to assign to a user a subscription, resource group, or a resource, all of the three, and the ability to do X. What is X? So X is, am I able to control this VM? Am I able to create a new resource group? Am I able to create a new subscription? Am I able to even access this subscription? Am I able to make changes on any of the resources that are there? This is something that's being applied through governance in terms of that enablement. And this also means having a conversation with the organization that you support. Gone are the days where IT pros, carte blanche enforce restrictions or enforce policies. It's now on behalf of the business that you're applying these governance rules. This is an open-ended discussion that you would have with the developers and with the IT professionals and the business decision makers to ensure that compliance is met when enforcing these type of rules. So let's dig down deeper and start with a security principle. So individuals or groups represented are Azure 80 users. Right? These are the roles you're assigning to have access to these resources. And again, these are collections of individuals it can also be Azure AD groups. So in the example that we actually shared it's the group of junior admins, not a specific junior admin, that had the ability to now manage that VMA. So it can be assigned to one user, it can be assigned to an entire group, and it also abides to services and applications. So in the fact that I can create resources or manage resources in resource groups, the same principles can be applied to applications and services in terms of the roles that they play to access said resources as well. In terms of the role definition, it's a collection of permissions. So what can this user do? If I'm assigning the contributor role for that VM, for the administrator VM, I have a limited set of capabilities or permissions I can actually interact with that VM with. The definitions are defined by the set of operations that can be performed. So the individual can start a VM, the individual can stop a VM, the individual can delete a VM. All can be specified and can be granular. And as mentioned, there's a slew of roles for permissions specifically that can be assigned. You can create custom ones as well if required. Not recommended, only because there's pretty much a great granular list of assignments that are available already. But if you really need to, we had one scenario where there was a requirement for a junior admin to only have reboot functionality. So a role was created so that individual can only reboot VMs if they stop. And nothing else, right? It depends on your business, but most times we usually suggest using the ones that are completely, that are already built for you. So as an example, the operations can be provided are read, write, delete, reboot, on and on. And then from the scope perspective, you're creating access boundaries. So access boundaries in terms of the role, do they have the ability to access the management group? The subscription. So the management group from the top down, managing the policies, and we'll touch that, what policies are in a second, for the resources that are in play. The subscription, so the immediate subscription that I'm spinning up for said resources, does that individual have access to that? The resource group, made available to them as well in terms of the resources, and the resource, of course, for that enablement. And then this is also structured in a parent-child relationship. So if I have the RBAC policy at the root in respect to the policy that is required for the whole organization, and then there's a subset of policies that are made available in respect to a specific resource or a specific subscription, it all funnels down and it all trickles down. The root always supersedes the child, but the child will have the additional instruction set specifically for that resource, but that may not be set up in the policy, set up in the role in the root. So as you saw in terms of the role assignment, we provided the ability for admin A, junior admin A, and the Tailwind Traders VM admins they have the ability to manage the VM itself of VMA. And that's what you will see in terms of the configuration when it's assigned. You can see that the role virtual machine contributor, there's also an I that's beside there. If you ever want to know in depth what each role can pertain or what it can provide, there are two ways to do it. If you click on the I, it will give you a detail in respect to what this role pertains to and what they have availability to. There's also, as mentioned, to create the customized roles, you have the ability to actually look at the roles in terms of their markup and make customization requirements to create that new role. So usually the I is more than enough, and you click on the I, it'll provide you full information in terms of what that role details. So this question comes up a lot. So, okay, so then what's the difference then between RBAC roles and Azure AD administrator roles? So the biggest difference is just that Azure AD manages Azure AD resources, whereas RBAC roles manage specific Azure resources. So Azure resources, again, likes resource groups and resources. Whereas on Azure AD, do I have access to this application? Do I have access to this document? Do I have access to this, this right? That's the difference. You're doing it on a resource base as opposed to access base. So key RBAC info to take into consideration as well. You know, who can perform said operations? Are they allowed, and you can actually deny availability to resources as well. There has to be a specific rule to put forth. This individual cannot create a new resource, or this individual cannot set up a new resource group. As we mentioned before, it's inherent of all children to assign this group. So if I have in the root RBAC, in the management group at the root, if there is a RBAC rule that says I can't create a VM, it funnels down to all the children rights as well in the management groups. And then can be applied to all levels of hierarchy, right, in terms of your role assignment. And custom roles, as mentioned, can be created, but not really suggested right now. Again, just because it provides a little more complexity, and the roles that are in there today are actually pretty verbose, and they have a great selection of availabilities or a restriction of availabilities if required. All right, let's look at the next challenge. So how many people have faced this challenge before? And this is a big problem that Tailwind Traders is experiencing, right? People are going into the Azure portal. They have the ability to create new VMs for their application that they're trying to run with. And you know what? I need this, this VM to have 8 cores and 120 gig of RAM and this huge storage, right? And then it costs the company, millions of dollars, but the individual that's creating this application is saying, you know what? This is what I need. This is what's going to be optimal for this. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at how to limit that functionality in terms of what SKUs individuals can use to spin up VMs via Azure policy. We're going to put the guardrails on to say, you know what? We're going to allow you to create VMs. We've assigned you the role to have the ability to create VMs, but we're going to govern and say, these are the only images, these are the only SKUs you're allowed to use to create the VM, so pick from this selection. So let's get through this demo. So we're back in the Azure portal, and we're going to go into policy. And we're going to get started with some definitions. And we're going to create a new initiative. And this initiative is going to be the one that's going to limit which SKUs an individual can spin up amidst this subscription. And we're going to create the category as limitations. Now, the available definitions is searchable. That too can be customized, and we'll show that in a second. But what's great about this is if you just use the ones that are predefined, a lot easier and faster to deploy. But customization can occur as well, and I'll show you that in a minute. So now we're going to actually select which are the allowed SKUs that individuals are allowed to spin up. So the DS3, the DS4, and we'll take the DS2. All right, we're saving the initiative. And now if we see the definition type by initiatives, we can pull up our newly assigned initiative, which is right there. And now we're going to assign it. So we're going to set up the scope. And we're going to assign the initiative. Now, again, searchable in terms of the initiative that we're going to assign, which is the one that we've created, which is the VM SKU limiter. Put in the subscription. It's being assigned by the prime admin, and we're going to assign it. So, as mentioned, and the reason why we record all our demos, this takes about 30 minutes to implement, right? Once the assignment is put forward, it takes about 30 minutes for this to take in effect. So we forward ahead 30 minutes, and we can see that the compliance initiative has been assigned. So we're going to go forward, and see, as you can see, there's no virtual machines right now. We're going to add a virtual machine. Add the resource group and the virtual machine name. And set up the region. And set up the image for Windows Server. As you can see, the standard D2S comes up, and we're going to change the size just to test to see if this is working in terms of the policy that was put forward. And we're going to try to do a B2MS. Username and password. It shows that the initiative limit VM SKU disallows this individual from spinning up that SKU. It's not available because of the fact that the policy says you're not allowed to do that. You only have the 3 available to you. And this is important, right? This is what governance is all about. It's ensuring that individuals that are spinning up the resources are doing so amidst the guidelines set forth by the organization. Again, it could be a compliance thing. It could be a cost measure. It could be, there's a whole slew of factors, and it's what governance addresses out of the gate. So now we've limited the SKUs. Our next problem is, how do we understand what resources are for what? So we've limited the SKUs for the DS2, DS3, and DS4, but now when these individuals are spinning up the resources themselves, are they spinning it up for a specific cost center? Is it for accounting? Is it for sales? Is it for marketing? Or, if the developers are spinning up the resources, is the resource for production or is the resource for development? All right, back into the portal. And we're going to go through back to the policy, and we're going to create the policy that specifically requires an individual, when creating the resource, to add a tag. So we go through, we select the resource group for Tailwind Traders. And we're going to set up the policy definition via search. So it requires a specific tag. And we'll enter in the subscription. And the subscription is important for auditing purposes. So if you're doing a backtrack in terms of how resources were created, this is great to have in terms of if I have to pull out information on anything, on what's occurred. We'll set up the tag name as environment, and we'll assign it. So again, it takes about 30 minutes to take into effect, and we'll fast forward to 30 minutes. We can see that it's online now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go forward and we're going to create a new VM to ensure that this was working. So we're going to attempt to add a virtual machine. And we'll go through again, Tailwind Traders for the resource group, virtual machine name. So we're going to add C. We're going to change the region. We're going to do a Windows server. We'll keep the standard size for now because we know that's compliant. We're going to put the username and password. All right, we're going to flip through everything here. So flip through networking. We'll flip through management. We'll flip through advanced. And we'll stop at tags for a second. So in this instance here, this is where the end user or the developer or IT professional or administrator, whoever that may be, would then apply their tags. They would click on the drop-down menu, and then the assigned tags that are available are there for that individual to select from. Let's, for argument's sake, say we don't add a tag. So if we don't add a tag, and my demo unfortunately rebooted, if we don't add a tag, it'll actually deny you. It'll say you're not within compliance. Similar to what happened with the SKUs, it will come up with the error that this individual is not allowed to create this resource because you haven't followed the policy of adding the tag to that resource. Again, this is important. This ensures that you have compliance amidst your organization if it has to appear to match to a cost center or as a production or developer, the production or development state for that resource. So let's look at policies and break that down. The policy is a rule that is going to be enforced. I can only create VMs using these following SKUs. I can only create resources with these specific attributes. I can only create resources if I add on a tag. There is functionality, though, that can append. So if you have a more rudimentary tagging plan in place, you have the ability to append. So when I created a resource, the resource is always going to be for marketing because it's within that specific subscription. I can append that tag when the resource is created, even if the user that's creating that resource doesn't add it. So there's a deny functionality, there's an append functionality, and there's an approve functionality that's made available to you. The initiative is a collection of policies. So you saw that in regards to when we were creating the initiative for the SKUs. These are the SKUs I'm allowing or making available for this resource to be created. And then the assignment is the scope of where the policy applies. Does it apply to a subscription? Does it apply to a management group? Where does this apply in regards to the resources that are being created? So, a couple examples, right? We touched on the ability to add on and deny, if not created, the tags and the SKUs that can be created. Other examples, enforce VM password settings. So length, time of before they have to be changed, on and on. Audits, as mentioned, the tags are hugely important for audits to understand what resources are being created for where. Allowed Azure locations. If I'm in Toronto, I don't want an individual to spin up a resource in Australia, right? Because of latency. So enforcing the fact that I'm only going to have in East US, which is closest for Toronto, or the local Toronto data center. This is something to ensure that, again, within compliance, and maybe even data rules, that data itself can't go across borders, and enforcing and restricting which data centers have said data. Enforcing resource tags we talked about, and encryption of storage. A lot of times, it might be an ISO requirement that the data that sits at rest has to be encrypted. So ensuring that when these resources are created, the VMs are being created, it's specifically implying the encryption piece to the storage for that functionality. Now, I made mention that on the policies themselves, there is availability for customization. So there is a JSON file that's available that can actually, each policy that is available as a standard definition policy can be customized. In essence, it's an if-then statement that's being created. If the following attributes are there, then accomplish this. Or if they're not there, in this scenario here, if the tag of cost center has not been applied to this resource, deny the ability to create that resource. Right? And then you can add additional functionality to this and create your own policies. Another example, enforcing naming convention. How many people remember the day when they used to name servers after wrestlers or servers after different types of cars, right? Gone are those days because those are the hardest infrastructures to manage. So in the cloud, actually having the enforcement of this is the way that you name this server. And if you don't name the server or the VMs specifically, it will disallow you from creating that resource. Another governance tactic to ensure that there's compliance and even the naming conventions of the resources that are being created. Enforcing the VMs that are being created to a specific set of SKUs. So you saw how we have the drop-down box, and I selected which boxes and which SKUs I'm allowing these individuals to create the resources with. I can actually create this policy through this JSON file and specifically outline. So in this case here, when the virtual Microsoft Compute virtual machine is being created, I'm only allowing the availability for the A series of SKUs, which is basic A1, A2, and so on and so forth, right? Again, a policy that I can customize and say, well, maybe I want to do the B series of SKUs, and I want to select which ones I want to make available. And then associate parameters with the SKUs. So in respect to, I only want SKUs that have 16 gig of RAM, or I only want SKUs that adhere to 4 cores on the processor. Also that availability in terms of resources that can be assigned, and maybe you have those scenarios where there are applications that require that power. You're assigning that policy to those to gain access to that, again, through the guardrails, what SKUs they can have access to specific to the needs that they have without blowing the budget of the organization. So, comparison, because we've gone through role-based access controls and policies thus far. The one thing I want you to be most aware of is what was in red. Role-based access controls assign specific rights to a user to complete specific tasks within Azure. So the ability to create specific resources or delete specific resources or manage specific resources. Policy manages the resource itself in terms of its capability. Which SKU can you create? Does it require encryption? Does it need to have a tag appended? So the role-based access control manages the user. Policy manages the resource. And aside from creating customized policies, this is the repo of, I saw a couple camera phones go up, or smartphones go up. Take a picture of that URL. This is the full gamut, and it's constantly growing. This is a public repository on GitHub for all the policies that are available today. Most have been submitted by Microsoft. All have been vetted by Microsoft. But there are community submissions available as well that you can go through and see if they apply to your business as well. So we showed you RBAC, role-based access control, and we showed you policy implementation. But now we're in a situation where, okay, that's great, but do I have to do that assignment for role-based access control and for policies on each subscription? Do I have to do it one by one by one by one, right? We're now in a scenario where, like as mentioned earlier, subscriptions are being spun up for specific applications. And if an organization has multiple applications, that means they have multiple subscriptions. So how do we address this? And this is the current challenge that Tailwind Traders is facing right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a management group. And the management group is going to have the rules for both role-based access control and for policy that can be adhered to for the subscriptions that are created in an instance of Azure specific to an organization. So let's get started on that. So we're going to log in as a senior admin, and we're going to the management groups. And I have 3 subscriptions, Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. And I go into Azure Active Directory, and I actually have to make available the ability for accessing of management groups. So we'll go into Properties, and we're going to allow this capability for access management. So we're going to go back in. And now the availability of a management group has been created. We're going to go in and manage and create the rules around that management group. And what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 management groups. We're going to create a root management group, and then we're going to create a child. And the root, as I said, would trickle down to the child in regards to the policies set forth for the entire organization. But there might be a requirement to split off in terms of certain functionality on the child piece, on the child management group. So let's create the root management group first. So we're creating the production management group. So here it is here, and we can go in, and there's nothing assigned to it yet. So we're going to add a management group to this, and here's the child management group that we're going to add. All right, so we're going to add the subscriptions to the child management group now. So these are the subscriptions that would abide by the rules that are put forth in the management group from both an RBAC and policy perspective. So we added beta, and we're going to add alpha. So now, in that management group that has the specific roles assigned through RBAC, or a specific policy assigned, it now pushes down to those subscriptions, those requirements, those rules. So now you've set up the one template in terms of a management group for role-based access control and for policy, and it's pushing down to those subscriptions automatically. That they now have to abide by these rules. So we're going to go in, we're going to add in a policy the definition for the management group. So we're going to add in the tag as we did previously. So it's going to, when you're creating a new resource, you're going to have to add that tag. So we'll create the tag as the environment production, and we're going to assign it. And then through the management group, this automatically assigns it to the subscriptions that are assigned to that management group. So we'll go in here, and now we'll add the role-based access control aspect of the management group. We'll add the role assignment. And we'll select our role as contributor. And we'll assign it to our junior admins. There we go, and the role assignment has been added. And that's it. So now those subscriptions that adhere to that management group, to the child management group, have the assigned functionality of the role-based access control for when you're going forward and accessing said resources, and or creating said resources or deleting said resources, what's been assigned in terms of that management group, and the ability to, or the requirement to add a tag to resources when they're created. And this is done to both subscriptions as opposed to me going through one subscription at a time and adding that functionality. So let's look at management groups in a little bit more detail. Oh, too far. Okay. So it allows you to organize access, policies, compliance, without doing this one subscription at a time. You're assigning this to multiple subscriptions to ensure compliance. You're ensuring that the organization as a whole, these subscriptions that have been deployed, meet compliance standards without worrying to go, does this subscription have the policy? Does this subscription have the role-based access control? It's all done through the management group, right? You can have up to 10,000 management groups per directory. So you can get as granular as required for your organization in terms of these management groups. And the management group tree can support up to 6 levels in depth. So you can have 6 levels of child management groups if required by your organization. So the root-based management group allows for global policies to be applied at the directory level. So if there is a specific rule that has to be abided by the entire organization in terms of any resources that are created on any subscription worldwide, at the root management group, this is where it would be assigned. You have the ability to automatically set this up when the management groups are created, so this would trickle down to said management groups. It includes all subscriptions associated with the default directory. So at the root level, this is the policy that would be stretched across all resources that are created throughout the organization's implementation of Azure. And the Azure AD Global Administrator cannot assign the RBAC roles through the root management group until it's enabled. So you saw in the Azure Active Directory management piece in the portal, I actually have to turn that on first before the management groups themselves can actually be created. And so here's a look at the hierarchy. The whole aspect of I have the root group that has the overarching permissions, overarching role-based access control or the policies that are put into play, and then how that trickles down to the child groups in terms of management. So we have one for marketing, we have one for IT, and one for infrastructure, and then those policy sets also adhere to the root policies and RBAC implementations put forth. So that's great for existing subscriptions and existing resources. But what happens when you want to create a new resource? What happens, in those instances where, okay, it's great, so we have all these subscriptions that are all under that management group, but now I want to create a new resource because there's a new division that's branching off at Tailwind Traders, but I want them to adhere to the policies that were set forth before. This is where blueprints come into play. And blueprints were announced last year at Ignite. And there's been a lot of exciting movement in terms of this offering, in terms of its capability. We're seeing blueprint functionality moving forward on resources that, previous to, everything would have to be applied manually. So imagine the ability to allow individuals to create a subscription under the default directory that automatically adheres to the requirements of an organization. So the guardrails are there, specific to the new resource that you're creating for an application or for a specific function. And that's what we're going to showcase in this demo. So back in the Azure portal itself, we're going to go through and we're going to go and create a brand new blueprint, because there's an individual at Tailwind Traders that wants to set up a new subscription for a net new idea or application that they want to implement. So we're going to start with a blank blueprint. And we'll set up a resource name, so Tailwind Traders Blueprint Alpha. And we're going to define, it's going to be at the root, so we're going to go to the tenant root group. And we're going to assign this to the subscription of Alpha. So this is where the subscription blueprint is going to be saved. It's going to be saved on Alpha. And we're going to add the artifacts now that will pertain to specifically when an individual wants to create said subscription, what the implementation has to abide by. So again, we're going to add in the requirement to add a tag as a policy definition. We're going to set the values. Here we go. We're going to add another artifact. So we're going to next choose the role-based assignment. And we'll go down to contributor. All right, and we'll save this draft. And now we're going to apply it to scope. So this is going to apply when somebody wants to create said resource. So here we go. So here's our definition. We've applied the definition that when resources are created in this subscription, it requires a tag. And we also provided the role-based access control user as a contributor. We're going to publish this as a 1.0 for the versioning. And of course, you increase that as you modify the blueprints moving forward, because you have that ability to make changes as required. We're going to now assign the blueprint to a specific region. And we're going to assign the contributor role to the senior admin. And we're going to set up the values for environment and production. And assign. So now, when an individual wants to create that subscription, they literally would copy from the blueprint what is available to them for that enablement of said new instance, said new subscription. So the beauty here is that there's no requirement for the developer who's given the green light to create this new subscription to go forward and ask anybody to set it up for them. And from an IT's perspective, we don't have to go forward and set up that environment because of the fact we've already set forth what the guardrails are in creating that new resource, in creating that new subscription. And you're ensuring that you're compliant. If there are rules in terms of, okay, so now you're going to spin up this new subscription for this application, what are the rules that the organization has to abide by? And you're not going to be worried from an IT perspective because you know that this blueprint is going to enforce what they're actually able to create. And then you can also lock foundational resources. So the ability to say, you know, in terms of this subscription that's being created, this is an application that's vital to the organization. You're not going to allow for deletion of said resource because it could be a catastrophe. And you're locking out that subscription from being deleted or from being removed without the specific access requirement. When you break down the blueprint, once the cloud engineer or IT professional has created the definition in terms of the artifacts, and that includes the ARM templates, it includes the policy definitions, it includes role-based access control, and it actually includes custom scripts as well, right? In instances that require specific resources to spin up in specific times or added requirements. These are all taken into consideration when creating said blueprint. And then they're assigned to individuals to have the ability to stamp out these environments so that they ensure that they have these guardrails that they have to abide by and ensure that they stay compliant on behalf of the organization. So let's see what we addressed today. We were, through role-based access control, provided the ability for certain individuals to have access to manage VMs. We were able to limit the deployment of specific VM SKUs using policy. And that same functionality in terms of policy also allowed us to tag resources as required for cost analysis and for the ability to add and remove production and development resources. We are also, through management groups, able to push that guidance and that guidelines across existing subscriptions in one fell swoop as opposed to doing them manually one by one. And then via blueprints, having the ability for those that are creating said resources as a net new resource to abide by the guidelines that the organization has set forth to ensure that the resources are created accordingly. So all demonstrations and all information that was shared today on this demonstration are available here. I'll let you all take a second and take a picture of that, of those URLs. And by the way, this will also be available on techcommunity.microsoft.com, and the recorded and the deck itself will be made available as well. And here are all the documentation that's available in docs.microsoft.com that pertain to the demonstrations that were showed today. So the availability of everything that was shown are also available on docs.microsoft.com, and in some instances, there are also labs that you can participate in. Microsoft Learn, so if you've not delved into this yet, Microsoft Learn is a great free resource that allows you in sandbox environments to spin up resources and to test out functionality. So specifically to the demonstration that we showed you today, there would be the URL for the collection of all the information pertaining to governance. And last but not least, if you're not taking advantage of it already, there is the availability here at Ignite for the getting the credit on a free exam. So if you take a picture of that QR code, it will provide you the coupon to gain access to the free exam. So that, in a nutshell, is governance from a fundamental standpoint. As mentioned, we went through a high-level implementation and a high-level explanation. There are other sessions that you should take into consideration when you're here at Ignite. I will be up the front for any questions you may have. You have been an awesome audience. Thank you very much.